Well, thank you so much for that introduction and for the opportunity to be with you guys today. So I'm going to switch gears a little bit and talk about, just as you heard, this emerging world of the metaverse and medicine meeting the metaverse and what that might mean for the future of healthcare in extended reality. So I'm going to start with a picture of me with one of our patients. I wonder if we can close the shot. Can you guys see that? It seems a little bit, okay, great. With one of our patients at Cedars Sinai Medical Center, where we've now treated almost 4,000 patients with virtual reality over the last 6 or 7 years or so. And she's allowed us to show her image. And at this moment, she's contemplating whether to use a virtual reality headset. It's a rather old one, old Samsung Gear VR headset, because she's been in the hospital many times with recurrent pain. And the question is can we use some non-pharmacological treatment to help support her pain? So I'm going to talk a little bit about that and tell a few stories of what happens when we use virtual reality at Cedars Sinai. So of course, most people in here have probably used virtual reality, are familiar with it. Certainly, when most people think of these headsets, they think of it as a platform for gaming and for entertainment, not really some kind of a treatment that would be ever regulated by the FDA, which it now is, or that would be used by doctors like me to help manage patients. But we've come to realize it's far more than a platform for gaming and entertainment. And I want to make that point as we move through here. Now, most of you are quite familiar with this. About this time last year, Mark Zuckerberg made this announcement that Facebook is no longer called Facebook. It's now called Meta. And this was a major pivot as we move into what we're now learning to be called the Metaverse. Still not exactly sure what that is. Going to talk a bit about that. We know there's about 10,000 programmers in Europe creating it, or some multiple versions of it. It may be some kind of dystopian future, and that's one of the concerns. But we'll find out in time exactly how it's going to be used. I will tell you, though, that in healthcare, we've been seeing incredible opportunities to use this, not for gaming. And this is a patient who has sickle cell anemia. And moments before we took this photograph, he was doubled over in pain and experiencing severe pain in his long bones and in his chest. But at this moment, he is flying in a helicopter over fjords in Iceland. And you can see the emotional response on his face. And for those of you that have been in VR, you know that it can trigger emotions. And that's one of the key differences between VR and every other audiovisual medium ever created. And I'll show you the functional MRI scans in a second, is it taps into the limbic system. It can drive emotions, and that provides a unique opportunity which could be used well or misused depending upon how it's applied, which is why the FDA is now involved. So you can see the emotional response, and that's the first thing I want to highlight here in the beginning of my talk, is that emotion really matters. If you think about the most powerful memories that you have in your own life, positive and negative memories, they're almost always tied to some strong emotional experience, whether it's getting married or having a child, physical abuse, emotional, sexual abuse. Some of the most powerful things people remember are tied to emotions. If you want to burn in a memory, you tie it to an emotional valence. And so VR can do that. And again, it could be scary if it's not used correctly. And we see people have panic attacks. We see people have flashbacks that we completely do not expect. But we also see some amazing responses, which I'm going to show a video or two of in a moment. So this is another patient at Cedars Sinai who has chronic liver disease, very advanced liver issues, and she can't take opioids because it causes encephalopathy, which is basically a form of brain fog, especially if you have liver disease. So we were asked to try and help figure out another way to help manage her pain. And so at this moment, she's on a beach in Hawaii. And the question is this just helping people kind of distract them, or is there some robust impact that it has over time? And the answer is both. So for acute pain, for short-lived acute pain, we definitely can use VR to bridge people through a painful experience if they're getting, let's say, a spinal tap or some kind of short-lived procedure. But longer term, the idea is to change the way the brain functions. And that takes time. And I'll explain how we do that. But the second thing I want to point out here is that she's escaping. This idea of escaping literally your body. Literally, we can have out-of-body experiences, which I'll show you in a second. Escaping the four walls of a hospital room that you're in, both physically and metaphorically is impactful. And so I'm going to talk about that. This is from Trip VR. I think we have somebody from Trip here. Is that right? Just by pure chance. One of the many visualizations that we've been experimenting with. We've also been creating our own, and I'll explain that in a second. But imagine that you're a patient in a hospital room suffering in pain, and then you all of a sudden are brought to these fantastical worlds that look nothing like the experiences that you had moments before. And the question is, what does that do to the nervous system? Okay, we measure that, and I'll show you in a second. What does that do to your mind and your body? And I don't mean in some new age sense. I mean neurologically, what's actually happening inside of your body. And this is an opportunity to allow people to realize that they have this ability that's almost supernatural. And I'm going to come back to that idea of supernatural because I use that word very specifically. I'll come back to that in a second. This is Harmon Clark, who's allowed us to show his image, and he has Crohn's disease. When he comes to the hospital, he was just in the hospital last week, and he's allowed us again to tell these stories. He comes in and asks for virtual reality. We have an inpatient virtual reality consult service run by Dr. Omer Liran, who is here in the audience, and I'm going to talk about him in a little bit and how we actually run this inpatient consult service at Cedars Sinai. And so he likes to surround the earth. He likes to blast off in outer space and look back on the earth. He says it gives him a sense of awe. He says it gives him this notion that he's bigger than, that he's part of something bigger, that there are other people on the planet that are suffering like him, and it gives him this feeling of goosebumps that he describes. And so this sense of awe is very important, and there's a neuroscience behind awe. And believe it or not, we know that virtual reality can achieve awe through literally measuring goosebumps as one biomarker of awe. You can measure this. This is a study called Are You Awed Yet? How virtual reality gives us goosebumps. And this was a study from Simon Fraser University in Canada, where what they did is they posited that virtual reality could maybe help make self-transcendent and transformative experiences of awe more accessible. So what they did is they put people in virtual reality. They then blasted them off over Vancouver, then over the Canadian Rockies, and finally into outer space, like we do, as I'll show you. And at the same time, they actually had a camera called a goose cam, where they measured the goosebump generation on the forearm as people were going through these experiences. And they found, yes, they could reproducibly create goosebumps. It was interesting that there were differences between, at least in this case, biological men and women in this study. For what that's worth, I'm not totally sure yet. Something maybe worth thinking about. But they found differences in empathy in the response to it. But in general, across both men and women in this study, roughly 50 to 60% had goosebumps within minutes. And that tended to correlate with a sense of empathy and awe. So you can read that study if you want to learn more about how VR is working in that dimension. Now, I want to tell a quick story of one of the first times I had a transformative experience in VR, and I'm going to show you the video. Okay, so this is at the University of Barcelona, and some of you have read the book. Actually, just Jenny here, who I think just signed your book, right? So I may be familiar with the story because I start the book with this. And so this is an example of bringing together these three concepts of emotion and escape and awe. And so there's a guy there named Mel Slater, who's a professor of virtual reality, and he's a very unusual lab. And so I went to his laboratory, and this is a picture of what it looks like. One of the various strange rooms in this lab. There's 4 black walls, there's a chair, there's a table. They sat me down in that chair, asked me to kick my feet up. This is one of the postdocs, Ramon Olivas. And he wired me up with a headset and with motion sensors and vibration engines on my wrists and on my ankle. And then when they put the headset on, all of a sudden, this is what I saw next. This is a video of me looking around in this beautiful kind of living space. And all of a sudden, that space had turned into kind of a beautiful kind of scene. There are my legs. And then they drew some blue lines on the table and asked me to trace them out in one-to-one perfect synchrony. As I moved my leg in real reality, that leg moved in virtual reality. And I started to wonder, like, whose legs are those? They look like my legs, they move like my legs, but they're not my legs. And I knew somewhere in that room there was a computer running thousands of lines of code convincing my brain that I had now occupied this body. So what happened next is he dropped some balls from the ceiling. As each ball hit me, I could physically feel it because it would vibrate. The haptic motion engine would hit me at the same time. So now I had what he calls full body ownership. And this is one of the things we can do in VR is we can put people into bodies And then we can do things from there. And one of the things that we can do is pull people out of their body. So I'm going to show it to you because you really can't even understand it unless you're in this environment, experiencing this firsthand. But what he did is he pulled me out of my body. And as I started to float up to the ceiling, these balls followed me, and I could still feel them, reminding me that I was still a self. I was still an entity. But I looked down at that body I just occupied, and I realized it was vacant. Not only that, it was motionless. It was dead. But I was somehow still alive, splayed apart in space and time within this room. And so I'm showing it to you again because I realized that I had died. But in the process of dying, it was almost spiritual. It was almost mystical. There was this something about it that I realized that the process of dying does not need to be catastrophic. And that unto itself is a major insight because we're all going to die. And I've thought differently about death ever since that. I'm still afraid, I don't want to die, okay, but I've thought a little bit differently about what it means to die. And this has actually been shown in a randomized controlled trial by Mel Slater. A virtual out-of-body experience reduces fear of death. And the details are more than I could get into right now. But the point of this sort of initial story is that VR is not just a tool for gaming and entertainment at all. I mean, it was developed not for that purpose. It was developed by the Department of Defense in the mid-century, last century, to, train fighter pilots, for example. So it's come to be a gaming and entertainment platform, but it's really a tool that profoundly modifies our perception of the world around us and also of the world within us. And so if we use it to recalibrate unhealthy perceptions, not just instantly, but over time, sometimes over weeks, VR has this potential to become a radical new tool that we can use to potentially improve quality of life. So this is now a picture of a functional MRI scan of a patient, or in this case, a research participant, using virtual reality who is also experiencing pain. You'll notice that this is from 2007, so this is not new science. This is going back some time. This is Hunter Hoffman at the University of Washington. And so what he's doing here is he's showing a patient with pain on the left, and then after virtual reality, you can see it tamps down the pain, both the sensory cortex, which is where you feel the ouch, and the center of the brain, where you have the emotional experience. It tamps down both the physical and emotional components of pain. And this has been shown in randomized controlled trials. On the left, at the University of Washington, people with burn injuries undergoing bandage changes. And on the right, famous study from the University of Michigan of women going through labor and delivery. And they're randomized between VR versus no VR. And in both instances, VR reduced both the physical experience of pain, but also the emotional and cognitive experiences of pain at the same time. Now, what we've been doing is going this a step further, trying to understand the actual biometrics of this. So we use the HP Omnicept, which has built-in biosensors, including heart rate variability, pupillometry, eye tracking. And this gives us the ability to measure something called cognitive load. This is my cognitive load as I'm trying to meditate while Omer Liron keeps coming in on purpose to interrupt me. And you can see as I start to meditate, very quickly I modify my not immune system, but maybe immune system too. I'm writing a grant right now about the immune system. But my autonomic nervous system. I actually change it, then he interrupts me, and you can see how quickly and how responsive this is to my changes in the nervous system. So what I want to show you now is an example of us using this with a patient. You can't see the patient. This is a rather new video. The New York Times reported on this, and the New York Times reporter was in the room as we did this, so you can read that article if you want to learn more. But this is a patient with irritable bowel syndrome with long-standing severe abdominal pain. Nothing's been working. She lost her son 6 months prior to this video being shot to a car accident, tragically, and she's been just wrecked ever since, emotionally, physically. So we brought her in, and on the right, you're going to see a computer of what she's seeing. Again, she is in it. She likes the beach, so she's on the beach, and we have a mandala that expands and contracts as she breathes in and out. We're entraining her breath, and on the left, we're measuring her biodata at the exact same time. And so you can see here, she's breathing in and breathing out. It's a little hard to see, but there are particles that are tracking, kind of like what Trip does. And you can see right here that when she first came in, she was anxious, she was upset, and almost immediately upon starting the virtual reality, she just collapsed almost into a trance. And this is what happened. She was quiet. And about 3 minutes in, I said, "Are you okay?" And she said, "Yes, I'm with my son now. I'm in heaven." And we said, "Are you okay? Do you want to stay in there?" She said, "Yes, I do." And towards the end, she started to cry, and she said, "I'm with God now. I'm with God." And it turned out she was one of 2 people that saw God that day. Not everyone sees God. Not everyone has a religious, spiritual experience, but some people do. And so this is not just a gaming platform. This is doing things in the brain. And the important thing is, after this is all over, we sat down and talked to her. And we said, what just happened inside of your brain that you felt that way and that your pain is better? She said, I have no pain at all. I feel numb. And this is the aha moment. Okay, this is when we really start to see the benefits, is by talking to patients and saying, you know what? You may have sort of inherited a body that has betrayed you, okay, that is not working. But it's not just a machine. We can't always fix the exact problem. We try our best. But no matter what body you're in, your brain perceives that body, and we can change the way your brain perceives your body. We can. It takes time. It takes between 8 and 12 weeks to change the actual function and structure of the brain through neuroplasticity, this gift that we all receive through evolution to literally change our brains. Our brains are not blocks of Play-Doh sitting up in our skull just sort of haplessly waiting for signals to hit it. It is a shape-shifting organ like any other organ in the body. So I'm going to end by just talking very quickly about what we've been doing at Cedars Sinai, where if you go to Cedars Sinai, we're the largest hospital in the western United States, go into a room that looks like this, but this is not a place of rest or healing. This is a biopsychosocial jail cell. People suffer physically, emotionally, socially in the hospital. And if you sit in the hospital all day, this is what you see. Somebody like me shows up. I'm not smiling. I'm pushing and prodding on the belly. It's like 6 in the morning. Then I disappear. Then I come back again. And all day long, this is what you see. So we've been talking to our patients and thinking, can we do better than this? Can we find ways to allow people to escape the 4 walls of the hospital, to go to these fantastical worlds? In this case, this patient is reaching out to a blue whale that's swimming across her visual field. And we've been spending time talking with our patients, really trying to understand from a human-centered design standpoint what works and what doesn't work. What do they think of this technology? When would they use it? Why would they use it? And we've documented all this in a number of studies. And so what we've now done is scaled this to have an inpatient virtual reality program, which this is Dr. Liron. He's a psychiatrist and also an incredible programmer and developer who actually creates our software. And so we now have a mobile cart. And I'm just going to end by I want to show you a video of 2 patients at Cedars Sinai using our newest program called Nature VR. And this just came out. This was just filmed about 2 weeks ago. This is the music that they're listening to during this experience. She has advanced cancer. Another patient has sickle cell disease. Yeah, we see that a lot actually. A lot of people that get emotional. Right.
I don't even have the words to explain it. It's beautiful. It's touching that you guys are doing something that's so great. Being in here and being able to just escape what's going on. Yeah, just when I'm like, ooh, I could just sit here, especially on the lake. I'm like, shoot, I can pretend like I got some barbecue. That's all I need. And just chill there all day.
So I'm going to end. I know we're out of time here, and I'm going to skip this part here, but just end by saying that I just talked about pain today. There's so many other applications we could talk about. This is a list of many of the different conditions for which virtual reality interventions are being developed. And we have a website if you want to learn more about this, virtualmedicine.org. A lot of resources on there, our research, all of our NIH trials that are going on right now. We put on a conference each year, and this is actually the only conference I've ever seen where people are actually scalping tickets outside of the, literally this is a real picture. So if you're interested, this is March 29th or 30th and 31st. I can't remember exactly which days it is. But you can go and check it out, and it does actually sell out every year. It's kind of cool. So all in there, and there's my book if you're interested. Put in a plug for that, and thank you so much. I'm from Hollywood, so I'm going to end with a scroll of all the people that helped with the work that I showed you today. So thank you so much.